Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Bodacious Rant with Burn and Rye. I'm Burn, and that guy over there is.
Well, it's Rye, of course.
Yes, he is Rye. He's the Rye guy, as I like to say. Well, maybe if you guys listened to our last little segment episode, we were talking about HBO Max and all that stuff that was going on there. So if you're here, then you know that we are going to talk about the big news that came out the other day. Well, I think it's been a week now that Oscar Isaac has been tapped to play the lead role of Solid Snake in the upcoming Metal Gear Solid movie that's been talked about for God knows how long at this point. But what do you think, man, of this? Finally, we're getting some big news coming out from this movie.
Well, I'm a ball of feelings with it. One, I'm excited for because after seeing Oscar Isaac in Triple Frontier last year in 2019, seeing him in a tactical, very, like a war vet role, I thought, oh my God, I would love to see Oscar Isaac in more action movies like that. Because the only things I've really seen him in were Star Wars, Ex Machina, and I want to say there's a couple other movies I've seen him in that I thought, okay, he's a great actor, but I don't know what else he could
He was
do.
also in Drive. Do you remember? I think that's maybe
Drive,
the
there
first
we
thing I saw
go.
him
That
in.
that is definitely the first thing I saw him. Thank you for reminding me. And that role, he was just like he didn't do much in it. He was just like a gangster character who's trying to make right. So
Yeah.
it wasn't a whole lot of action or anything like that. But in Triple Frontier, I got excited about what he was able to do in that one with Ben Affleck, Garrett Hedlund, Charlie Hunnam. And then I remember last year, Boss Logic, the amazing Boss Logic. He's a concept artist on Instagram. If you haven't heard of him, he does a lot of great stuff, and he's just an all. It seems like an all around cool guy. So shout out to him for
Yeah.
making the art he does. And he did a rendering of Oscar Isaac with the infamous bandana covering his whole forehead and a stealth suit, essentially basically being Snake.
Yeah.
And
A cigarette.
exactly. Now, before we continue, just to clarify, you said you and I were talking about in our private conversations that Jordan vogt-roberts he tapped him to make that because he wanted to see how it was, or I thought Boss Logic just did that for fun. So I don't know if that's which one's true.
Yeah. So Jordan Vogt-Roberts came out on Twitter and he posted screenshots of his conversation with Boss Logic because I guess it seems like everybody in the industry knows each other, and if you're in the movie industry, I mean you got to know who Boss Logic is because at this point he's done like a lot of like art, digital art and stuff for like Marvel and stuff like that. So I mean the guy's really cool, and if you don't know him, you've probably more than likely seen his work because his work gets passed out along a lot in the internet because it's pretty cool stuff. And yeah, he posted a conversation where he's like, "Hey, I have this idea," and then how about in a blank as blank? Like he blocked it out, because he didn't want to spoil it for anybody. That he posted the their text conversation on, and Boss Logic was like, "Oh hell yeah, that sounds super dope." So and then so basically, Bob Roberts was like saying, that he asked Boss Logic to do the art for him, and that's not surprising because Bob Roberts has reached out to a lot of like his favorite concept artists to make concept art for the Metal Gear Solid movie. So it seems like that was something he was doing at that point in time, and probably still doing now, reaching out to people and getting some cool concept art for his ideas for the movie.
Yeah, which is great. I know this has been a very big passion project for Vought Roberts, which again, more props to him. You want to get something done, you gotta put your heart and soul into it. And the fact that he's gotten such a recruitment of, concept artists from not just Boss Logic, but other ones I've never even heard of across the industry, really put in some amazing art out there for it. It really just that's why I'm excited for it. And well, we'll get back. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll get into what Metal Gear is, at least for the most part, what I know of it, and why we're a little more doubtful of it. But it's just the passion that he has for. It. I'm really excited to see him portray that and execute that in this film. But also too, I thought it was funny that as Boss Logic did that, there were interviews with Oscar Isaac, and he's like, "Oh, I would love to play Snake in a movie." And I thought, "Oh my
Yeah,
God,
it
that's
was actually I think
yeah."
when he was talking about Triple Frontier, actually, like, I think someone like had asked him like what
What
he
other
wanted to
yeah,
play.
what other role
Yeah.
would you like to play? It's like, I would love to play Snake. And it's like, oh snap. So I wonder even if Oscar Isaac last year kind of thought maybe he heard feels of it because Robert's been on the getting concert art because I think for the last 5+ years he's really been trying to get this done. He did Kong Skull Island, right?
Yeah, he was the director of Kong Skull Island.
And I personally loved Kong Skull Island. I think that was one of the better King Kong films done. I mean, I know there was a lot of comparisons with Peter Jackson's King Kong and this one, and it's like you can't really compare the two because they're
Yeah.
totally different films. One's more on the comic book graphic novel side, the other one's more on the cinematic, very dramatic, old school style. It's a little hard to describe, but
But yeah, but when you watch both of them, they're like very different interpretations of the Kong story, where Peter Jackson's is more faithful to the original, I think, 1950s movie when it came out, I don't know, 19 something. But
yeah.
the original movie that had come out, and, and this one is a very different interpretation of that, where it's like set in Vietnam and, it's very much like a war film. And super cool, by the way. I think Jordan did a really good job with that movie.
Well, also the design of Kong because he was kind of a mix of like a modern, like what we want to see modern day going against Godzilla, but also he took a lot of inspiration from the claymation Kong of like the 1930s and 50s. Like it was pretty, I kind of appreciated that because and it translated beautifully well into it. He was just a brute force of nature in the film. But let's keep going on. So why this is really cool is that not only did the director get the actor he wanted for the role, but this is another video game adaptation that is has such a great source material. Like I've only played Metal Gear Solid, Phantom Pain, and I also played that was it Ground Zero, that little like the little digital game version before that one. Was that what it's called? Do you remember?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it was Ground Zeroes and then the Phantom Pain, but they're essentially the same game. It's just that the Ground Zeroes was kind of like the prologue, and for some reason they decided to split it off into its own like quote unquote game, even though it was essentially the same game and just broken off from it. But yeah, it was Ground Zeroes and then the Phantom Pain.
Yeah, and it was only one mission too. So it was like
Yeah,
this is basically like a DLC for that game. But so that's all my understanding of it. And what Vogt-Roberts is doing with this one, it sounds like he's trying to remain faithful to the first two games and how that story went along. But also he's not trying to reinvent the wheel, but he also wants to put his own spin on it. He's trying to change it up a little bit by mixing these two games together into one film. Now, why I'm worried is that again, Metal Gear Solid has a lot of cool. It's designed. It was made by Hideo Kojima, which is one of the most renowned names in all of gaming, and he made some of the best video games in that, like Metal Gear Solid 4, Metal Gear 5, and Ground Zeroes. And like, how do I put this? Basically, the fact that he's no longer like, I think he has his endorsement on this too. Do you know?
yeah. So Jordan Vogt-Roberts and Hideo Kojima are pretty good friends now at this point, and I think it started when he was maybe reaching out to him to want to make this movie and basically get his blessing from it. But yeah, I mean Jordan Von Roberts and Hideo Kojima, the creative brain behind the Metal Gear Solid franchise, are really good buddies. So much so that Jordan Von Roberts was in Hideo's last game, his most recent game, Death Stranding. Yeah, so to know that there's that camaraderie between them, that at least I have the feeling that Jordan's gonna really really want to be as faithful to the franchise as possible.
Yeah, so that's great too when you have a director and writer that loves the source material and wants to stay faithful to it. However, Metal Gear is such a crazy world. I don't know too much about it. It still confuses me. But even Vought Roberts has said this world is so convoluted, it's so complicated. I don't want to throw too much at the audience because I mean the hardcore gamers will understand that. But for casual people, like I definitely consider myself casual with especially with this material. I don't know if it's gonna be too much or just, so out there. Because he does want to make something out there. And how much let me ask you this, how much do you know about Metal Gear? Is there any way you can clear it up for what it's really about for anyone listening in or anyone who's curious or heard about this?
I know the general like gist of it, and I guess maybe that's probably the best way to approach it, especially for someone who really doesn't know anything about it. But essentially, what it sounds like is he wants to adapt the first game. Not technically the first game, because there were two games that came out before Metal Gear Solid. They were
Hmm.
just called Metal Gear, and they were like Game Boy games. And those kind of tie into it, not so much so. The whole continuity is kind of again convoluted, but the main gist of the first game, which is it sounds like he wants to adapt, was that there's this terrorist group, called Foxhound, and they basically take over this base called Shadow Moses, and they want to use this thing called a Metal Gear, which is like a giant weapon of mass destruction, basically, to take over the world. And they want what was it? I think they want like this person called Big Boss. They want like his remains, and they have hostages and stuff. So basically, they're threatening to end the world if they don't get what they want. Basic espionage, spy stuff. These bad
Doctor
guys.
Evil and Austin Powers story, essentially.
Yeah, bad guys want a weapon and they want something in return, or they're gonna, destroy the world. And then so, the main character that you play as in the game, Solid Snake, is tasked to, infiltrate the base. It's a stealth game, so you want to infiltrate stealthily and, basically take them out and get the weapon back, save the world. So that's essentially the gist of it. And honestly, it gets a whole lot more complicated there, where Snake and a lot of the villains of the games are all clones of each other, and again, it gets crazy.
There's
But yeah,
cyborgs, there's mechs, there's biomechanical cyborgs everywhere. So,
hmm
but
yeah,
that's also why it's so intriguing. But what I'm worried about is that I don't know if that could translate well into film, regardless of how faithful you are. Just because the movie industry, like anything in entertainment, is a bit of a gamble. You're going to have movies, obviously, that may look great, have great acting in it, but they may flop critically and, box office wise, financially, just because the audiences and the critics just maybe didn't get around to it. It's a very opinionated game. So, but we've also seen like movies like the Transformers, which are just awful films. I mean, they look great. They have some great actors and they have great action moments in it, but they are just stupid, terrible films. Yet they make bank without fail. It's almost like Call of Duty. You may not like it that much, they'll still make millions of dollars every year. It doesn't make sense,
oh
but
yeah.
it just works. How exactly does a pause tracker even work? It just does. So again, and I've heard his passion, especially on this one interview he was on Collider a few years ago, talking about why how much art, like he was basically talking about the concept art behind it and how much he wants to do it. And it's such a weird thing because Metal Gear, especially the Metal Gear Solid Phantom Pain, the one I played 5 years ago, it's a very tactical based game. So it's basically like real world tactics and weapons essentially, but then it has so much sci-fi and anime elements to it. Like we've said, how there's giant mechs everywhere that definitely don't even wouldn't exist, especially at the times that they're made in. Like Metal Gear Solid, the Phantom Pain, the last one was made in what took place in the 70s or 80s, I believe. It was like Cold War era or something, right? Do you remember?
Yeah.
And then there's a giant mech. There's literal phantom soldiers disappearing and phasing everywhere. And then there's a woman who can shoot you from across a valley, teleporting everywhere. So it's such a crazy thing. It's like you're playing through your own anime story that you'd want to see a live action. But again, that doesn't always translate well. Like Tomb Raider, Assassin's Creed. What's another couple video game movies that are still like have just failed?
Oh gosh. I mean, Mortal Kombat 2, I would throw in there. I'm not a big fan of
It
that
was the
one at
best
all.
one. What are you talking about?
I
I
mean,
can't
the
say
the
that.
older Tomb Raider movies with Angelina Jolie, they're kind of like guilty pleasures, but they're not great by any means.
And the Resident Evil movies. One of my I forgot those.
Oh yeah, that's the biggest one. I was about to I was about to get to
There's
that. They're the biggest stain on video games as adapted to movies. And then there's a lot of other ones that are probably even worse though, like the ones directed by Uwe Boll. I don't know if you know
Blood
about that
Rain.
guy.
He did Blood
Yeah,
Rain. That movie sucked.
he's done a lot of like low budget adaptations to video game movies, and he's just awful. I don't know how he keeps getting to make movies.
And then there's that Monster Hunter movie directed by Paul W.S.
Paul
Anderson.
W.S. Anderson, yeah,
Okay, it is.
the
Okay. I keep
same
forgetting. I keep
the
forgetting which
same
Paul
Resident Evil
Anderson.
guy.
Yeah, he's making Monster Hunter with his wife Mia Jovovich leading it again. I mean, he made the monsters faithful to the game, but the movie looks stupid as hell. I mean, it's if it does well, I'll blow myself. I don't know because I don't know how it'll do well. But then we've also seen several adaptations that have done well. One that actually comes to mind, technically is an adaptation, not really, was Castlevania on Netflix. It's a series, an animated series, so it's a little bit easier to execute, sort of. But that was a good example of a video game actually doing well, in another medium. So
Yeah, and I mean, it seems like they're kind of on the right path, at least as of right now, with the most recent releases of like, video game adaptations. Like you said, Castlevania was really good. Also on Netflix, The Witcher. I mean, that was really good too.
and
And
but that's
did
more from the book, so that's a bit of a
yeah,
halvesies.
that exactly. Yeah, that shouldn't be considered a complete like, well, it's this video game adaptation. No, like you said, yeah, there were books before and they're adapting the books, not the video game. So, there's a little, leeway there. And then I would also say Detective Pikachu and Sonic. I mean, we saw those,
That's true.
do pretty well in theaters, even though Sonic had to get like a kick in the nuts to
Yeah.
to actually do it because I mean, as we saw, anybody who saw that initial trailer with that original Sonic model that they had. God, that was going to be awful. But I mean, they listened to the fans and they changed it and made him look more faithful, and we saw that be successful. So hopefully, that's a sign for movie studios to say, "Hey, don't screw this up. Like, stop trying to make your own little spins to it. Like, keep it faithful, and you'll get your fans."
In all honesty, it was actually pretty enjoyable. And Detective Pikachu was, I consider that more of an animated, like an anime adaptation. So that just because I feel like the show came out before the games, right? Do you remember?
No,
No. Oh, so they did come out. Oh yeah, they came out on Game Boy before the show even started. Never
yeah,
mind. That's my bad on that one because I had to play back my memory for that. But so there's a couple examples, and that's totally fine. But even then.
but yeah, those are the exceptions.
But even then, they've done. I feel like they've done barely well enough. They're not the best properties to really say, oh my God, that could be done great. It's like, were they that great? No, not really. Especially when this one trailer you showed me off of YouTube, the Dark Pokemon trailer, or Pokemon Dark, that's what it was called. It was
Oh
one of the
yeah.
honestly, for real quick, for those of you who haven't heard of this, go check out this trailer. It's made by No One Studios or something. I forgot what the page is called. But if you look at Pokemon Dark, it is such a creepy take on Pokemon, like a more realistic take. It makes Detective Pikachu look like the G-rated PG movie that it was. This is like a Pokemon for those who have grown up with it, like myself, and I thought that's something I would totally want to see as a series. But let's move on. That's why I'm a little doubtful of this film, just because again, it's a game and it's a story that's so real world tactically based. Like I could see it'll be like Triple Frontier, but then you throw in like Terminator or even just I don't know how to describe it. It's going to combine so many elements, and I know he's trying to avoid that. Vogt-Roberts is trying to basically say, I don't want something like some people can mash up. I want it to be its own thing without reinventing the wheel. I'm just worried that even though he has so much passion to it, it may not translate well because they'll maybe focus on some aspects that may not work with everybody.
Yeah, and then another reason to call for concern is, it's the studio, Sony Studios. They've shown in the past that they're and like their producers are pretty hands-on with their films, and more often than not, they ruin a lot of the creative decisions in those movies, especially with those leaks that came out a few years ago about, like the Sony leaks or whatever, where yeah, I mean, essentially that brought everything to light that, yeah, all these producers are way too hands-on and way too involved and more often than not really give bad advice on how to make the movie and it just ruins it. So that is another cause for concern.
Yeah, just because again, they basically ruined the Spider-Man universe. But we'll talk about Sony and Spider-Man in the next episode, in all honesty. So we'll not. I don't want to harp too much on that. But no, we have seen it evident even with the several superhero films like the DC universe with Warner Brothers. We've seen that the studio heads and the corporate conglomerates have basically just messed up that whole world until they basically said, no, you're going to let the directors and writers do their jobs or you'll just keep losing money. Because Batman vs. Superman financially did well, critically it flopped terribly. And Batfleck is one of the most debated. characters. I actually got into a debate at work with a couple people saying
Oh,
I
wow.
I defended Ben Affleck because he's my favorite Batman. They said Chris Bale or whatever. And again, to each their own opinion. I was just kind of joking, like, you know what? Until you can apologize to me, I'm not talking about this anymore. I was just being petty about it, but it's one of those things like producers, in my opinion, are just the guys that you put money into it. If you have faith in it, you will not touch it. You will let the directors and writers do their jobs. Like, it's okay to oversee it and have your concerns, but that doesn't mean try and change it, because if you're just a most of these producers, I just want to say, are financiers. They're not necessarily writers or directors, right? Like, at least for a good portion of the time.
Well, I mean, the producers are really the ones who get the project, up and running. They're the ones that, they pick the project and then there's make it happen. So they're really the driving force in terms of like, studio and money, the financial side of things that, if you didn't have, you wouldn't get the movie. So, they really do play the biggest part. That's why they get, the Oscar when the movie gets Best Picture. There's the producers that accept it because they're the ones that really get it up and off the ground, and then hire everybody onto the project and stuff. So yeah, I mean they're a big part of it, and how involved they decide to get in on the creative side, it really varies. There isn't a set amount there, or like there isn't anything in the contract that says, all right, producers have 30% creative control or something like that. That there isn't anything set in stone. It really comes down to the individual, and unfortunately, what we've seen is that there are certain individuals that, for whatever reason, are behind the bigger projects, like these superhero movies or these like video game adaptation movies. That it's just been unfortunate that in the past that they tend to be pretty hands on and not in the best of ways. And it's one of those things, producers do get like a really bad rap because we do only hear about them when they're involved in making decisions and making bad decisions. But there are a lot of times where we don't hear about, and that's the good stuff. Where maybe they make a suggestion or they say something, and does make the movie better. So it is easy to like to jump on the hate train against producers. But I mean, as of late, it's with the stuff that we like, especially like the bigger budget stuff. They tend to be in the headlines for the wrong reasons. So that's all. That is on them at the end of the day.
Yeah, like, I mean, I kind of thought of James Cameron as an example of a producer. Like, he's a great director. He's a bit of a jerk in real life from what I've read on, but he does make good movies. So you got to separate the art from the artist. But
Yeah.
with
Oh,
like a
wait,
lead,
just based on that, I mean that's such a great example. I mean, let's look at James Cameron as a producer. Uh, One of the creative things he did. Remember when that first trailer for Alita Battle Angel came out, and everybody was complaining about the eyes. There's something looked very wrong with the eyes,
I didn't care
and
about it, but yeah, I remember that
but
backlash.
there was something like off about him.
Yeah,
And James Cameron made the suggestion. He said, "Why don't you make the pupils bigger? Like,
yeah.
make it bigger." And after that, we didn't really see as many complaints because it worked. Like, for not seeing that white around the eyes was not as weird as having the eyes all filled out. And that's just a small thing, but I think for anybody who watched that movie and enjoyed it, or maybe watched it, the eyes weren't as big of an issue now because it wasn't like something creepy. It wasn't something uncanny valley. And that's just that's a small example, but that is an example of a producer making a suggestion that in the long run helped the movie in some sort of way.
Double-edged sword with that. He did make that suggestion. However, he also oversaw a lot of the plot with that film, and I know he wanted to make it so Robert Rodriguez to basically he was tapped to direct it, but Robert Rodriguez did say, yeah, James, I kind of don't want to work with James Cameron again because he was basically hovering over everything. I didn't really have a chance to make it my own. And Robert Rodriguez, although he has been a little hit and miss with movies, he had a couple great hits, but majority of his films have been flopped, in my opinion. They just don't hit that well. So it was one of those things, like, a great director can be make some great decisions. However, there's also decisions they'll make, or maybe how much they want to oversee the film, that can stop it from being exceeding its potential. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah.
So that's how I looked at that, is that, when you give a producer too much creative control, it doesn't really become what the project could have been. It just becomes their vision. And whether it flops, they can still pass it off like, well, the director in the studio, they didn't do a great job. They basically did that. And it's like, but you had created, you put more suggestions into it. So that's why I'm a little worried about it. I just want it to do well because Metal Gear is such an interesting world. I kind of want to read up on it, and if I could play the older games, I totally would. Especially Metal Gear 4, where Snake is looking like an old Clint Eastwood guy with his white stash and white hair, still kicking ass. So, what remains to be seen. Fan casting, though, any actors you'd want to see along with Oscar Isaac in this?
Oh man, I don't know, man. There's just it's would be hard to say. There's a lot of pretty good actors in there. So, I mean, if Oscar Isaac is the basis, then I think we're gonna get some like pretty cool actors in the movie. I mean, like having someone like him on, who I think is like one of the best working actors today. I mean, that just opens the door up to like potentially anybody. Like I could see like I don't know, like Charlize Theron being in like there. I think she'd be a really cool, character in the movie. Or I don't know. It's hard to say just because like a lot of the characters are so weird. You know what I mean? But maybe like someone like Tom Hiddleston would be like a good like Liquid Snake or something. That'd be pretty dope. I don't know. There's a lot of really cool potential there.
I call Josh Brolin for Big Boss and Charlie Hunnam as Revolver Ocelot.
Oh, there you go. That's a good
Those
revolver
are two
also.
people that come to mind for me that I'm like, I would totally want to see them Oscar Isaac or even Garrett Hedlund. Just basically bring back the Triple Frontier cast for it. Just that way he has some familiarity, but that'll remain to be seen. Let's another piece of movie news we will talk about in the next segment. So, ladies and gentlemen, again, if you tuned in for this Metal Gear Solid or Metal Gear movie specifically, I'm sorry, Solid is the future ones. Metal Gear is what it's based on. Leave in the comments, suggestions or questions. We'll get around to it. Let's keep the conversation going about this. Well, Burn, anything else you want to add to this Metal Gear conversation?
Uh, no, just that. I mean, we were focusing on like the stuff that we could, thought would be bad about it. But I mean, I enjoyed, Kong Skull Island. So I think at the very least, Jordan Vogt-Roberts can make this a really cool action movie that looks pretty. At the very least, I think that's probably what we're gonna get. So if that's the case, then I think I'll be happy.
Yeah, as long as it may not have to be Oscar winning. If it does, fantastic. If it doesn't, as long as it's an enjoyable film, I'll be okay for the most part. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, keep ranting and keep on staying bodacious.
Stay the Bodacious, Rantlicious, everybody.
Deuces.
Adios.